The classroom was filled with the usual hum of chatter as students settled into their seats, the first bell signaling the beginning of another school year. It was a fresh start, but for Jason, the unease was all too familiar. He was used to being the quiet one, the one who always kept his head down, stayed out of the spotlight. After all, it wasn't just the new year that made him nervous, it was the constant battle he fought, not just with the subjects in school, but with the invisible walls built around him because of the color of his skin. Jason sat in the back of the room, a place where he could disappear. His backpack was slung over his shoulder, and his eyes focused on the desk in front of him as he waited for the bell to signal the start of class. He had always been the quiet one, the one who got overlooked. But inside, he knew he was different. Jason had a mind that could outpace even the smartest students in his class. The problem was, no one ever gave him the chance to prove it. And Jason had grown used to the feeling of being underestimated. It wasn't that he minded school, it was the people. The teachers, the students, they all saw him as a stereotype. He was the kid from the rough neighborhood, the one who could only go so far, the one who had potential but lacked the right opportunities. And no matter how hard he tried to shake off that label, it stuck to him like glue. Jason had learned to deal with it, though. He kept his head down, did his work, and tried to get through the day without drawing attention to himself. Ms. Daniels, the new math teacher, entered the room, and the chatter stopped instantly. She was tall, poised, and confident, everything that Jason was not. She scanned the room as the students silently filed into their seats, and for a moment, her eyes met Jason's. He could almost feel the judgment radiating from her, a teacher who would probably look at him and think he wasn't capable of much. "All right, class, let's get started," Ms. Daniels said, her voice cutting through the silence. "Today is the first day of the year, and I want to kick things off with something a little different. We're going to start with a challenge. Something that will set the tone for this class." Jason's stomach churned. He hated challenges. They always felt like a way to make him stand out, like a test he never asked for. Ms. Daniels walked over to the whiteboard, writing down a complex math problem. It was a series of equations, long and convoluted, the kind of problem that most students in the class would struggle to solve. "All right, this is a problem from a higher-level math class. It's not something any of you are expected to solve today, but I want to see who can give it a shot. And just to make things interesting, the first person who can solve it gets to skip the homework for the week." Jason felt a pang of anxiety shoot through him. He had always been good at math, but this wasn't just about solving a problem, it was about proving something. And the moment someone saw him struggle, he knew they would only remember that. The room was filled with a buzz of excitement. Jason could hear the whispers around him, "This is going to be impossible, who can do this? I bet Jason's not even going to try." Jason took a deep breath, trying to calm himself. He wasn't going to let them get to him. He had to focus. As Ms. Daniels began to walk around the room, watching her students attempt to tackle the problem, Jason opened his notebook and looked at the equation again. The more he looked at it, the more it made sense. The answer was right there, hidden behind all the complexity. But he wasn't the first to raise his hand. It was Jason's classmate, Jake, who had his hand in the air almost immediately, his face twisted in concentration. Ms. Daniels nodded, clearly impressed. "Jake, you think you have an answer?" Jake stood up and walked to the whiteboard, his chalk squeaking as he began to write down his solution. Jason could see the frustration building on Jake's face as he worked through the steps. He was close, but not quite there. The answer he had was almost right, but not perfect. Ms. Daniels smiled. "Not quite, Jake, but a valiant effort. Anyone else want to give it a try?" Jason's heart began to race. Should he try? He wasn't sure if he wanted to take the bait. The pressure of being the first black student to even attempt the problem weighed on him. If he failed, it would only confirm what people already thought about him. But if he succeeded, that would be something. Without thinking, Jason's hand shot up. Ms. Daniels raised an eyebrow, clearly surprised. "Jason, you want to try?" Jason stood up slowly, feeling all eyes on him as he walked to the front of the room. The room was silent, the only sound was the soft scrape of the chalk against the board as he copied the problem down. He could feel the heat of their gazes on him, the quiet judgment that hung in the air. But he ignored it. He focused on the numbers. He worked through the problem step by step, his mind moving faster than his hand could keep up. He didn't need to look at anyone else, didn't need to prove anything to anyone except himself. The solution was clear, and he wrote it down with a calm certainty that made even him feel a little shocked. He turned to face the class. "That's the answer," he said simply. The room was dead silent. Jason could feel the weight of their stares as if they were waiting for someone to tell him he was wrong. But no one spoke. Ms. Daniels blinked, her face unreadable as she examined the board. "Well," she said after a long pause, "it seems you've got it right, Jason." A ripple of murmurs spread through the class, and for the first time, Jason felt the tiniest bit of pride swelling in his chest. He had done it. But it wasn't just about the problem. It was about the fact that he had done something no one expected him to do, and in that moment, he had earned something that wasn't given to him, respect. "Jason," Ms. Daniels said, her tone softening, "that was impressive. I'll make sure to remember that." The bell rang just then, signaling the end of the class, but Jason didn't hear it. He stood there, feeling the eyes of his classmates on him, but this time, he didn't mind. As he grabbed his bag and walked out the door, Jason knew this year was going to be different. It had to be. And he wasn't going to let anyone define who he was. Not anymore. Jason had just taken the first step toward showing the world the genius they had overlooked for so long. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Jason walked out of the classroom, still feeling the weight of his classmates' surprised looks on his shoulders. It was hard to believe what had just happened. For so long, he had been the quiet, overlooked student, an invisible part of the classroom furniture. But today, things had changed. The problem that Ms. Daniels had posed had seemed impossible at first, but to him, it was like a puzzle waiting to be solved. And for the first time, he'd solved it, not for anyone else, but for himself. But now, as he made his way to his next class, the familiar feeling of doubt began to creep in. What if it had just been a fluke? What if Ms. Daniels had just been impressed by a random stroke of luck? What if his classmates still didn't respect him, still saw him as the kid from the wrong side of town who had no business being smart? Jason shoved the thoughts away as he entered his next class, but the doubt clung to him like a shadow. He couldn't escape the feeling that he was being watched. Every time he sat down, he felt eyes on him. The students, the ones who had once ignored him, now seemed to be paying close attention. It wasn't just curiosity, it was something deeper, something that Jason didn't quite understand. He could feel their silent judgments, but at the same time, he also saw the shift. He had proven them wrong, at least for now. It wasn't just the students who had noticed, either. After his performance in math class, Jason couldn't help but notice Ms. Daniels' lingering gaze. She wasn't looking at him with the same cool, detached demeanor as before. Instead, there was something different in her eyes, a mixture of surprise and perhaps a bit of admiration. But Jason wasn't sure if that was a good thing. In his experience, attention wasn't always a welcome thing. In the past, any time someone took notice of him, it had come with expectations. People expected him to be something he wasn't, something he didn't want to be. It was easier to be invisible, to fly under the radar and not attract attention. But as he sat in his next class, his mind kept drifting back to that moment in Ms. Daniels' class. The memory of the shocked silence after he solved the problem was still fresh. It had felt like a victory, but at what cost? He had just drawn a line in the sand, one that separated him from the version of himself he had been before. Jason didn't want to admit it, but he was terrified of what came next. He had proven that he could do it, but the world didn't just let you prove yourself once and then walk away. No, if he was going to keep this up, if he was going to continue breaking down the walls others had built around him, he would have to do it again and again. And that wasn't something he was sure he was ready for. The bell rang, pulling him from his thoughts. He stood up quickly, grabbing his books and heading out into the crowded hallway. As he walked, he tried to ignore the whispers and sidelong glances, but they seemed to follow him everywhere. Jason made his way to the cafeteria, hoping to find a quiet corner where he could eat in peace. But as he entered, he saw that it wasn't going to be that easy. His friends, Emma and Carlos, were sitting at their usual spot, waving him over excitedly. "Jason! Over here!" Emma called out, grinning. "We need to talk about what happened in math class." Jason hesitated for a moment before walking over to them. Emma and Carlos were his two closest friends, the only ones who had never treated him like an outsider. They were the ones who had always stood by him, even when the rest of the world seemed to dismiss him. "You were amazing in class today," Carlos said, his voice full of enthusiasm as Jason sat down. "I mean, no one expected that. Ms. Daniels was totally thrown off. You got the answer faster than anyone else. Seriously, man, that was crazy." Jason gave a small smile, but the praise didn't feel as good as he thought it would. He didn't know how to respond. He had expected them to be proud of him, but part of him still felt like he had just gotten lucky. What if they were just impressed by the fact that he had finally stood up for himself? What if it wasn't the solution that blew everyone away, but the fact that he had shown them something they hadn't expected? "I don't know, man," Jason said, pushing his food around on his plate. "It's not like it was that big of a deal. I just did what I always do. I didn't think it was anything special." Emma gave him a skeptical look. "Are you kidding? That was amazing. You solved the problem that no one else could. You're smarter than all of us combined." Jason shook his head. "It's not about being smart. I don't know. I just did it, and now everyone's acting like I'm some kind of genius." Carlos leaned in, his expression serious. "Jason, you are a genius. Don't downplay it. You're way smarter than most people give you credit for. And maybe that's why people treat you differently. Maybe it's not just because of the color of your skin, but because they don't know what to do with someone like you." Jason frowned, looking down at his tray. He wasn't sure how to process that. He had always thought that if he kept his head down, kept to himself, he could avoid all the drama. But now, he was the center of attention. People were looking at him, and he didn't know if he was ready for it. "Maybe it's not about what they think," Jason said quietly. "Maybe it's about what I think. I'm not trying to impress anyone. I just don't want to be the guy who stands out. That's all." Emma reached out and placed a hand on his arm. "Jason, you are going to stand out. You can't hide your genius forever. And the sooner you accept that, the better." Jason sighed, looking at his friends. They meant well, but part of him still wanted to fade into the background. He didn't want to be the person everyone stared at, the one they expected greatness from. He wasn't sure if he was ready for that kind of pressure. "I'll figure it out," Jason said, standing up. "But right now, I just want to get through the day without anyone making a big deal out of it." Emma and Carlos exchanged a glance but said nothing more. They both understood how Jason felt. But deep down, Jason knew they were right. The moment he had proven himself in Ms. Daniels' class was just the beginning. And whether he was ready or not, he was going to have to face the expectations that came with it. As Jason walked out of the cafeteria and into the hallway, he could feel the eyes on him again. This time, though, they weren't filled with judgment. They were filled with something else, something that made his heart race and his palms sweat. The weight of the expectations was heavy, but maybe, just maybe, it was a weight he could bear. And for the first time in a long time, Jason wasn't sure if he was afraid of what was coming next, or if he was ready to embrace it. The rest of the school day passed in a blur for Jason. His thoughts kept circling back to the same question, what now? He had proven himself in math class, but the tension from that moment lingered, and the fear of what might come next still gripped him. The rest of the students, especially those who'd underestimated him, were now watching him closely, as if they were waiting for him to fail. By the time the final bell rang, signaling the end of the day, Jason was exhausted. He grabbed his bag and walked out into the hallway, his mind racing. As he passed through the crowded corridors, his eyes scanned the faces of his classmates. Some of them looked at him with curiosity, others seemed almost afraid to meet his gaze. Jason knew what they were thinking, he's different now. He's the guy who solved the impossible problem. But that was the problem. Jason didn't want to be the guy who solved anything. He didn't want to be the center of attention. He just wanted to get through high school like everyone else, quietly, unnoticed. But now, it felt like he couldn't go back. The moment he had stood up in Ms. Daniels' class and solved that problem, things had changed. As Jason stepped out into the parking lot, he spotted Emma and Carlos waiting by the gates. They were already talking animatedly, but when they saw him, they waved him over. "Jason," Emma called. "We need to talk about your math problem some more." Jason smiled, though it was a little forced. "What's there to talk about? I just solved a problem. It's not that big of a deal." Carlos grinned. "It is a big deal, man. Everyone's talking about it. It's not every day that a student just walks in and solves something no one else can. You made an impression." Jason rubbed the back of his neck. He had tried to downplay it, but it seemed like everyone else wasn't letting him. The attention was overwhelming. "Yeah, I know. But I just want it to be over. I don't want to keep hearing about it." Emma raised an eyebrow, sensing the tension in Jason's voice. "Look, I get it. But you can't run from this. You can't pretend it didn't happen. People see you differently now." Jason shrugged, still feeling the weight of their words. "I don't care what people think. I'm just trying to get through school without causing a scene." Carlos shook his head. "That's not going to happen. You've already made your mark, Jason. You're not the same person you were yesterday. And you know what? That's okay. You're going to have to embrace it sooner or later." Jason wasn't sure if he agreed with that. He didn't want to embrace the idea of being the kid who stood out. He had spent so long trying to blend in, to escape the expectations that people placed on him, especially because of where he came from. Being recognized for his intelligence felt like a double-edged sword. It could open doors, but it could also create enemies. He didn't want to draw attention to himself. But now, it seemed like he had no choice. As the three friends walked toward their buses, Jason's mind kept returning to one thought: how long could he keep this up? How long could he stay under the radar now that the spotlight had been turned on him? The next day, when Jason entered Ms. Daniels' class, the atmosphere was different. There was a noticeable tension in the air, a buzz of excitement mixed with a touch of apprehension. The students seemed to be waiting for something, and Jason could feel their eyes on him as he walked to his seat. He hated it. He just wanted to be left alone. Ms. Daniels walked into the room, her eyes scanning the students before locking onto Jason. A small, approving smile tugged at her lips. Jason couldn't help but feel uncomfortable under her gaze. He wasn't sure if she was proud of him or if she was simply waiting for him to perform again. "All right, class," Ms. Daniels began, her voice projecting authority. "Today we're going to do something a little different. We're going to have a challenge, a group challenge. I want each group to solve a problem together. The catch? Only one person in the group can speak at a time. The rest of you will have to listen and contribute silently." Jason's stomach tightened. He was used to being part of a group, but this felt different. It felt like another test, one that he wasn't sure he was ready for. Ms. Daniels, it seemed, wasn't going to let him off easy. "I'm pairing you all up," Ms. Daniels continued, "and I'll be watching how you work together as a team." Jason felt his heartbeat quicken. He didn't want to be the center of attention again, but it seemed like Ms. Daniels had other plans. As she called out the names of the groups, Jason's name was paired with someone he didn't expect, Jake, the same student who had tried to solve the problem in class the day before. Jason's stomach twisted. Jake had always been one of the popular guys in school, the one who always had a comment for everything and a smile for everyone. Jason had never really spoken to him, and he didn't know how to feel about being paired with him now. As Jake made his way to Jason's desk, he flashed a grin. "Looks like we're a team, huh?" Jason gave a small nod, unsure of how to respond. He wasn't in the mood to make small talk, especially not with Jake. Ms. Daniels gave each pair a challenging problem to solve. Jason glanced at the sheet of paper in front of him. It was a complex set of algebraic equations, even harder than the one from yesterday. Jason could feel the pressure mounting. The entire class was going to be watching them work. If he screwed up, everyone would see it. If he solved it, they'd expect more from him. "Okay," Jake said, rubbing his hands together, "let's do this. You take the lead, and I'll try to keep up." Jason glanced at him, surprised by the offer. It was rare for Jake to defer to anyone. He wasn't sure what to make of it. "I'll do my best," Jason said, unsure of what to say next. He began working through the problem, each step coming a little easier than the last. But the eyes of his classmates were still on him. He could feel the weight of their stares, the expectation. They were waiting for him to fail, just like everyone always did. And it was in that moment, more than any other, that Jason felt the pressure to prove them wrong. As he reached the final step of the problem, Jason hesitated for a second. Could he really do it? Could he live up to what they were expecting? Or was this where it all ended? With a deep breath, he wrote the final solution on the board. The class went silent. Ms. Daniels' eyes flickered over the board. Then she turned to the class, her voice calm but filled with an unspoken acknowledgement. "Well done, Jason," she said softly. "And Jake, thank you for working so well with your partner." Jason's heart pounded in his chest. He had done it again. But as he returned to his seat, a feeling of unease crept into his mind. This was far from over. This was only the beginning of the test. The days after the challenge seemed to drag on for Jason. He couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed, not just in the way his classmates saw him, but in the way he saw himself. Each passing day felt like he was walking a tightrope, always one misstep away from losing everything. His mind raced with thoughts of his classmates' reactions. The whispers, the stares, they weren't as obvious as before, but they were still there. Jason could sense it in the way people adjusted their behavior around him. They were trying to figure him out, trying to understand the quiet kid from the back of the classroom who had suddenly turned into the boy who solved the impossible math problem. Jason's focus, however, was becoming increasingly difficult to maintain. As the days passed, it became harder for him to ignore the pressure. His friends, Emma and Carlos, continued to cheer him on, but he wasn't sure if they truly understood the weight of what he was carrying. That afternoon, after school, Jason sat alone at the bus stop, staring at the pavement beneath his feet. The cold wind rustled the leaves around him, but he barely noticed. His mind was consumed by the pressure to keep performing, to keep proving that he was more than just the kid from the wrong side of town. As he sat there, a voice interrupted his thoughts. "Hey, Jason." He turned to see Jake walking toward him. Jason raised an eyebrow, surprised. Jake wasn't exactly the type to seek him out for casual conversation. He was the popular kid, always surrounded by others, always the center of attention. Jason had expected him to act like he didn't even know him after the challenge in class, but here he was, standing in front of him. "Hey, Jake," Jason replied, trying to sound casual. "What's up?" Jake shoved his hands into his hoodie pockets and sat down beside Jason. "Not much. Just wanted to talk, man." Jason's confusion must have shown on his face because Jake gave a small chuckle. I know. You probably don't expect me to come over here and talk to you, but I've been thinking about what happened in class." Jason shifted uncomfortably. "What about it?" "I don't know," Jake said, scratching the back of his neck. "It was impressive. You solved that thing so fast. I thought it was just luck at first, but now I'm starting to wonder if there's more to you than I thought." Jason couldn't help but feel a little defensive. "It's not that big of a deal. Anyone could have done it." Jake shook his head. "Nah, man. Not anyone. I saw the way you worked through it. You didn't just guess the answer, you knew what you were doing. You understand the stuff." Jason sighed, running a hand through his hair. "It doesn't matter. It was just one problem. I'm just trying to get through the day without making a bigger deal out of it. You know that's not going to happen, right?" Jake said, his tone serious now. "People have already started talking. You're not going to be able to hide anymore." Jason frowned, his stomach sinking. "What are you talking about?" Jake leaned forward slightly, his voice lowering. "You've got people watching you now. And not just the teachers. I've heard some of the other guys talking. Some of them are not so happy with how you made us all look." Jason's heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean?" "Look, man, it's not personal. It's just, you showed us up. We all thought we were the smart ones, right? But you came in and did something none of us could. And some people don't like that. They might not say it to your face, but you'll start feeling it." Jason's mind raced. He had always been careful not to attract attention, not to stand out. But now, in one moment of brilliance, he had become a target. The realization hit him hard. This wasn't just about solving problems or getting good grades. This was about power, perception, and control. He wasn't just a student anymore, he was a competitor. And some people didn't like losing. "So what do I do?" Jason asked, his voice quiet. Jake shrugged. "I don't know, man. But I think you're gonna have to learn how to navigate all this. You can't just pretend it's not happening." Jason sat back, staring at the horizon. The weight of his words hung in the air like an invisible cloud. He had never thought about things that way before, how the very thing that had made him feel accomplished could also make him a target. He had been so focused on the work, on proving that he was capable, that he hadn't considered the consequences of standing out. "Well," Jake added, standing up, "I'm just saying, you should be careful. People don't always like being outshone." Jason nodded slowly, watching Jake walk away. His words echoed in his mind long after he had gone. It wasn't just about being smart. It wasn't just about showing up to class and getting a perfect score. It was about surviving in a world where being different could make you a threat. The rest of the week was a blur of increasing tension. Jason felt like he was walking on eggshells, constantly aware of the eyes on him, the whispering behind his back, the subtle, unspoken judgments. Every time he walked into a room, it felt like he was being evaluated, like he was being measured against some unseen standard. But the pressure wasn't just external. It was internal, too. Jason began to doubt himself. Was he really as smart as people were saying? Or was he just lucky, riding a wave of temporary success? The more people praised him, the more uneasy he became. He didn't want to let anyone down, but he was starting to feel like he was living up to a version of himself that wasn't real. At night, Jason would lie in bed, staring at the ceiling, his mind racing. Was it possible to live up to the expectations he had set? Could he keep up with the pressure, or would he eventually crack under it? The next day, during lunch, Jason sat with Emma and Carlos, as usual. They were talking about something, but Jason wasn't really listening. He had stopped eating, pushing his food around his plate. "You okay?" Emma asked, her voice soft, but concerned. Jason nodded, forcing a smile. "Yeah, I'm fine." But Emma wasn't convinced. "You don't seem fine. You've barely touched your food." Carlos raised an eyebrow. "Is this about the math thing again?" Jason sighed, leaning back in his chair. "It's not just about that anymore. It's everything. People are treating me differently, and I don't know how to handle it." Carlos looked at him seriously. "Look, Jason, I know this is tough. But you don't have to figure it out all on your own. You have us. And, trust me, we've got your back. We've seen you work. You're not a fluke. You're the real deal." Emma nodded in agreement. "You've got this, Jason. Don't let anyone make you feel like you don't belong." Jason wanted to believe them. He really did. But the truth was, he wasn't sure he had it in him to keep this up. Every step forward felt like one more step into the unknown. And he wasn't sure how much longer he could keep pretending that everything was fine. For the first time in his life, Jason wasn't just fighting to prove that he was smart, he was fighting to prove that he belonged. And he wasn't sure he was ready for the battle ahead. The days continued to pass, and Jason's unease only grew. Despite the encouraging words from Emma and Carlos, he couldn't escape the feeling that he was standing on the edge of something he wasn't prepared for. He tried to bury his worries beneath the surface, keeping his head down, doing his work, but the weight of his new reputation followed him like a shadow. Everywhere he went, there was an unspoken tension, a sense that he was always being watched. He could hear whispers in the hallways, the occasional side eye as he passed by his classmates. Ms. Daniels noticed it, too. She had always been the type of teacher who believed in challenging her students, but now, she seemed to be pushing Jason harder. It was as if she were testing him, seeing just how much he could handle. It wasn't just the pressure from the school either. Jason's family was starting to notice the change in him as well. His mom, especially, seemed to be looking at him differently. She was proud of him, of course, who wouldn't be proud of their child for excelling academically? But Jason knew that she could sense something in him that was different. Something that wasn't there before. That afternoon, as Jason sat at the dinner table, his mom turned to him with a smile. "How was school today, Jason?" she asked, her voice soft but with a hint of curiosity. "It was fine," Jason replied, pushing his food around on his plate. His mom eyed him for a moment, clearly unconvinced by his answer. "Jason, you don't have to keep everything to yourself, you know. I know things have been a little different lately." Jason looked up, meeting her gaze. "What do you mean?" "I mean," she said slowly, "I know you're doing well in school. And I know you're smart, honey, but I can tell you're stressed. You're not yourself lately." Jason dropped his fork, suddenly feeling overwhelmed. He hadn't realized how much he had been hiding, how much he had been keeping from his mom. She could always tell when something was wrong. He didn't want to burden her, but the truth was, he didn't know how to handle what was happening. "It's just," he started, pausing to find the right words. "It's not just about the math stuff anymore. It's everything. It's like everyone's expecting me to be something I'm not. Like they're waiting for me to fail." His mom's expression softened, and she reached across the table to place her hand on his. "Jason, you don't have to be perfect. You don't have to prove anything to anyone. Just be yourself, okay? You've always been enough." Jason nodded, but even as he said it, he knew the truth, it was easier said than done. The pressure, the expectations, it felt like an invisible weight that he could never escape. The harder he tried to ignore it, the heavier it became. And the more he tried to shrink back into the shadows, the more people seemed to notice. Later that night, as Jason lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, he tried to push his thoughts away. But they kept coming back. The feeling of being trapped in a role that he never asked for, a role that others seemed to have assigned him. And the worst part was, he didn't know how to change it. He thought about what Jake had said. People were watching. They were waiting for him to crack. And the more he pushed back, the more it seemed like they were just getting started. He didn't know what kind of game they were playing, but he wasn't sure if he wanted to be a part of it anymore. The next day, when he entered Ms. Daniels' class, the atmosphere was thick with anticipation. Jason couldn't shake the feeling that everyone was waiting for him to either succeed again or fail spectacularly. The tension in the room was palpable, and he could feel the eyes of his classmates on him as he walked to his seat. Ms. Daniels stood at the front of the room, her hands clasped together. "Today," she said, her voice steady, "we're going to have a surprise quiz. But don't worry, it's not just about getting the answers right. I want to see how you handle the pressure. I want to see how you think when things get tough." Jason's stomach dropped. It felt like she was testing him, not just his knowledge, but his ability to perform under pressure. He could already feel the sweat forming on his palms. "I want each of you to tackle these problems individually," Ms. Daniels continued. "No talking. No asking for help. Just you and the problem. And for the record, I'll be watching closely." Jason felt his heart race as he looked at the sheet in front of him. It was filled with complicated equations, the kind that made even the most confident students hesitate. He glanced around the room. Some of the other students looked nervous, while others were already scribbling down answers. Jason knew that everyone was watching him. They wanted to see if he could handle it again. They wanted to see if he could perform under the same kind of pressure that he had faced in class before. For a moment, Jason considered giving up. Just walking out of the room and letting them all win. Letting the pressure consume him. But then he remembered something his mom had said, "You've always been enough." With that thought in mind, Jason took a deep breath, focused, and began working through the problems. His hands were steady, and his mind felt sharp. He worked through each problem methodically, taking his time. The room was quiet except for the sound of pencils moving across paper. As he reached the last question, a familiar feeling settled in. He wasn't just solving a math problem anymore, he was proving something to himself. The weight of everyone's expectations still pressed on him, but for the first time, he realized that maybe he didn't have to carry it alone. He finished the quiz with a sense of quiet determination. As Ms. Daniels walked around the classroom, collecting the papers, she gave Jason a small, knowing smile. He didn't know what to make of it, but in that moment, it felt like a small victory. When the bell rang, signaling the end of class, Jason stood up and grabbed his things, feeling the familiar sense of relief wash over him. The day wasn't over, but for now, he had survived. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. As he walked out of the classroom, he passed by Jake, who was waiting by the door. Jake gave him a quick nod, his eyes scanning the hallway. "Not bad, man. You handled that better than I expected." Jason didn't respond immediately. He just nodded and kept walking. He didn't need to prove anything to Jake, or anyone else. He had proven something to himself. But as he stepped into the hallway, the reality of it all hit him again. The pressure, the expectations, the constant scrutiny, it was all still there, waiting. And no matter how hard he tried to ignore it, Jason knew that the hardest battle he would ever face was the one inside himself. But for now, he had made it through another day. And that, in itself, felt like a victory. The following days passed in a blur. Jason had survived the surprise quiz, and for a fleeting moment, he thought the pressure might start to subside. But as he walked through the halls, the weight of it all seemed to follow him, unrelenting. His classmates' glances, their whispers, it was like they were waiting for him to slip. The challenge wasn't over. If anything, it had only just begun. The more Jason thought about it, the more he realized that the academic pressures were just the tip of the iceberg. He wasn't just fighting to keep up in class anymore, he was fighting for his place in the social pecking order. Being the smart kid came with its own set of rules, and Jason wasn't sure he wanted to play by them. He had never cared much about fitting in, he was just trying to survive high school. But now, it felt like he was stuck in a game he didn't know how to win. It wasn't just his classmates that were watching him. The teachers seemed to take more interest in him, too. Ms. Daniels, for one, seemed determined to keep pushing him. Every time she assigned a new problem, it was always more complicated than the last. She was testing his limits, and Jason could feel it. His brain buzzed with the constant need to perform at a level that was starting to feel unsustainable. After school one day, Jason sat in the library, trying to work through the next set of equations Ms. Daniels had handed out. His pencil scratched against the paper, but his mind was a million miles away. He couldn't focus. The constant pressure, the eyes on him, it was all starting to make him feel like he was suffocating. As he closed his textbook, he noticed a familiar figure standing near the entrance. It was Emma, waving at him with a bright smile. Jason stood up and walked over to her, trying to push away the anxious thoughts swirling in his head. "You look deep in thought," Emma said, raising an eyebrow. "Everything okay?" Jason forced a smile. "Yeah, just trying to get through some stuff. It's a lot, you know." Emma nodded knowingly. "I can imagine. You've been kind of distant lately. We miss having you around." Jason sighed, rubbing his eyes. "It's hard to explain. I feel like everyone's watching me now. Waiting for me to mess up. I can't shake the feeling that if I don't keep up, I'll disappoint everyone." Emma's expression softened. "Jason, you don't have to do this alone. You've got us. You've got me. Don't let the pressure get to you." Jason gave her a small, appreciative smile. I know. I just feel like I'm about to crack, you know." Emma put a hand on his shoulder. "Hey, you don't have to be perfect. You're not alone in this. We all have our moments. You just have to let us in." Jason nodded, but as he looked at her, a part of him felt like he couldn't let her in. He couldn't let anyone in. Not while he was still struggling to keep his head above water. Later that evening, Jason sat on the edge of his bed, staring out the window at the dimming sky. His phone buzzed on the desk across from him. It was a text from Carlos. "Hey, man. You up for hanging out this weekend? We need to take your mind off all this stuff." Jason stared at the message, his finger hovering over the reply button. He appreciated the offer, but a part of him felt like he couldn't escape it, it being the expectation, the weight that he carried every single day. The moment he stepped outside the boundaries of his schoolwork, he was still Jason, the guy who had solved the impossible problem. The guy who couldn't just relax, because people were always watching, waiting for him to fail. After a long moment of hesitation, Jason typed back, "Maybe. I don't know yet. I'll let you know." He hit send and dropped the phone on the bed. The weekend came, and Jason found himself once again alone in his room. His mom had gone out to visit a friend, and his dad was away on a business trip. The house felt emptier than usual, and Jason found himself trapped in his own thoughts. What was wrong with him? Why couldn't he just be like everyone else? Why did it feel like the world was closing in on him? It was around this time that the cracks began to show. Jason couldn't keep up the act forever. The endless string of assignments, the ever-present pressure to perform, the way people looked at him, it was all becoming too much. And it wasn't just his classmates and teachers who were demanding more from him. It was himself. In the middle of the night, Jason found himself pacing the living room, unable to sleep. The ticking of the clock on the wall was the only sound that filled the silence. He ran a hand through his hair, staring at the darkened window. What if he wasn't as good as everyone thought? What if he was just a kid who got lucky once? The thought gnawed at him. The more he thought about it, the more he began to doubt himself. Was he truly talented, or had he just gotten lucky? Did he have the mental fortitude to keep up with the pressure, or was he bound to break? The next day at school, the weight of his thoughts followed him into the classroom. Ms. Daniels stood at the front, a new set of problems on the board, but Jason couldn't bring himself to focus. His mind felt foggy, clouded with self-doubt. He tried to work through the problems, but the numbers seemed to blur together. After a while, Ms. Daniels approached his desk. "Jason, are you okay?" Jason looked up at her, his face pale. "Yeah, I'm not feeling great today." She raised an eyebrow, her expression softening. "You've been off lately. Is something going on? You don't seem like yourself." Jason swallowed, forcing himself to sit up straighter. "I'm fine, really. Just tired, I guess." Ms. Daniels studied him for a moment, then nodded. "If you ever want to talk, I'm here. Don't be afraid to ask for help." Jason gave her a tight smile. "Thanks, Ms. Daniels. I'll be okay." But as she walked away, Jason felt a tight knot in his stomach. The pressure wasn't just coming from the outside anymore. It was coming from within him. And he didn't know how much longer he could keep it all together. The cracks were deepening. And Jason was afraid that sooner or later, they would shatter entirely. Jason's world had started to feel like a constant loop of chaos, and he wasn't sure how much more he could take. The relentless pace of school, the eyes that followed him in every hallway, the weight of his own expectations, he couldn't escape it. It was all coming to a head, and Jason knew that something had to give. It happened on a Tuesday afternoon. Ms. Daniels had announced a major project, a presentation on advanced math concepts, and Jason was already dreading it. The last thing he needed was another way for people to scrutinize him, to test whether he could live up to the legend of his genius. He tried to focus, tried to dive into the material, but it was like his mind wasn't cooperating. The numbers swirled in front of his eyes, and the more he tried to solve the problems, the more they seemed to slip through his fingers. For the first time, Jason felt the panic rise in his chest. He was supposed to be able to do this, wasn't he? This was his thing. He had always been the smart kid, the one who could solve any problem with ease. But now, even the simplest equations felt like mountains. He shut his textbook with a snap, startling his classmates. Emma and Carlos, who had been sitting nearby, exchanged concerned glances. They knew something was off. Jason had been acting different for days, distant and distracted. But he didn't want to talk about it, not yet, anyway. His mind raced, the pressure mounting with every passing second. He couldn't breathe. He couldn't think. He needed to get out. Without saying a word, Jason stood up and walked out of the classroom. He didn't know where he was going. All he knew was that he had to escape, even if it was just for a few minutes. Jason ended up outside the school, standing in the parking lot. The cool air hit his face, but it didn't bring any relief. He leaned against the brick wall, closing his eyes and taking deep breaths, trying to calm his nerves. His thoughts were a blur, a mix of self-doubt, pressure, and fear. "I can't do this," he whispered to himself, his voice cracking. For the first time, Jason admitted it out loud. He couldn't keep up with the impossible expectations. He was just a kid, one who didn't have all the answers, one who wasn't perfect. The pressure had built up until he felt like he was drowning in it, and now he was suffocating. His phone buzzed in his pocket. It was a text from Emma. "Where are you? You left class without saying anything. Are you okay?" Jason stared at the screen for a long moment. He knew he needed to tell her the truth, but the words felt heavy, like they were trapped in his chest. He didn't want to let anyone in, not now, not when he felt like he was falling apart. Instead of replying, he turned off his phone and tossed it in his bag. He needed to be alone. He spent the next few hours wandering around the nearby park, his thoughts swirling with no direction. The weight of everything was unbearable. The thought of going back to school, of facing the eyes of his classmates, was terrifying. And the thought of failing, well, it was the one thing that scared him more than anything. Eventually, Jason found himself sitting on a bench, staring out at the empty playground. He wasn't sure how much time had passed, but the sun was starting to dip below the horizon. The fading light mirrored his mood, dark, cold, and uncertain. "Hey, you okay?" Jason looked up to see Carlos standing in front of him, his expression unreadable. Jason didn't answer right away. He couldn't bring himself to. Carlos sat down next to him, not pressing for an answer but offering silent support. They sat there for what felt like an eternity before Jason finally spoke. "I don't know if I can keep doing this," Jason admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. Carlos didn't flinch. "Doing what? Being the genius?" Jason nodded, his throat tight. "Yeah. I'm not who they think I am. I'm not perfect." Carlos gave a short laugh, but it wasn't mocking. "You don't have to be perfect, man. No one is. Not even Ms. Daniels, who always looks like she has it together. She's just a person, too." Jason shook his head, frustrated. "It's not about being perfect. It's about surviving the expectations. I feel like I'm supposed to be this superhero, someone who has all the answers. And every time I fail, every time I can't solve a problem or keep up, it's like I'm letting everyone down." Carlos sighed. "I get it. But you don't have to carry that weight alone. We're here for you, Jason. We always have been." Jason looked at his friend, a flicker of gratitude crossing his face. But the truth was, he didn't know how to let anyone in. How could he? The pressure had been so overwhelming for so long that he didn't even know where to start. "You don't understand," Jason said quietly. "I don't know how to let go of this image everyone has of me." Carlos was silent for a moment, then spoke with more gravity. "I think the problem isn't that you have an image, man. It's that you're trying to be someone you're not. No one expects you to be perfect, Jason. People just want you to be you, the guy who's got this incredible mind, yes, but also the guy who's just human." Jason felt a lump form in his throat. He hadn't heard anyone say that in a long time. Maybe he had spent so much time trying to live up to other people's expectations that he had forgotten who he really was. Or maybe, he had never even known. "You're not alone in this," Carlos continued. "We all go through stuff. We all have our struggles. But pretending to be perfect isn't the answer. You've got to let people help you. Don't push us away." Jason swallowed hard, the weight in his chest easing just a little. Maybe Carlos was right. Maybe it was time to stop pretending, to stop being the person everyone thought he should be, and just be himself. But it wasn't going to be easy. Jason knew that. He had built walls around himself for so long that breaking them down would take time. But maybe, just maybe, he didn't have to face this alone. The sun had almost completely set by the time Jason and Carlos stood up from the bench. They didn't say anything more, but there was an understanding between them. "I'm still not sure I can do this," Jason said, his voice low. Carlos clapped him on the shoulder. "You don't have to do it all at once. Take it one step at a time. And remember, I'm here. We all are." Jason gave a faint smile. For the first time in days, it felt like maybe, just maybe, he could find a way through the darkness. It wasn't going to be easy, and the path ahead was still uncertain. But with his friends by his side, he wasn't completely alone. And that, for now, was enough. As they walked back toward the school, the weight on Jason's shoulders felt a little lighter. It was still there, but it no longer felt like an impossible burden to bear. And maybe, just maybe, that was a start. The next few days were a blur. Jason had returned to school after his unexpected break from reality, but the pressure still lingered like a cloud above his head. It wasn't just about the academics anymore, it was about how he saw himself. For so long, he had been the kid who could solve every problem, who was always on top of everything. But now, he wasn't sure who he was anymore. Despite his best efforts, the fear of failure still gnawed at him. Every glance from his classmates felt like judgment, every expectation felt like an unspoken weight that pressed down harder with each passing moment. But Carlos' words echoed in his mind, "You don't have to be perfect. You just have to be you." The truth was, Jason didn't know how to be anything other than what everyone expected him to be. But as the days passed, he realized that maybe he didn't have to have all the answers. Maybe it was okay to be a little bit lost. The first real shift came on a Friday, when Ms. Daniels handed back the latest set of assignments. Jason braced himself. He was prepared for the worst, ready to see that his recent struggles had finally caught up with him. As he flipped through the pages, he was surprised to see that he hadn't done as badly as he thought. In fact, he had done better than he expected. There it was, a solid B+. Not perfect, but it wasn't the failure he'd feared. The grade was a relief, but what was even more important was the note Ms. Daniels had written at the bottom of the page, "Jason, you're capable of more. Don't doubt your abilities. You've got this." Jason stared at the note, his fingers running over the words. It wasn't a glowing remark, but it was a sign. Maybe he wasn't as far off the mark as he had believed. Maybe he could still do this, maybe he could still be the person everyone thought he was, but without all the pressure. But it wasn't just about school anymore. Jason was slowly starting to realize that the real challenge wasn't in the equations or the problems he was asked to solve. It was about who he was when no one was watching, about learning to embrace his humanity without letting the weight of the world crush him. As he sat in class that day, Jason felt a shift. He wasn't as tense. His mind wasn't racing. For the first time in a long time, he felt like he could breathe. The weekend came, and Carlos was the first to reach out to Jason. "So, are we going to hang out this weekend or what? I know you've been busy with school stuff, but I think you need a break." Jason smiled, his fingers hovering over the text message on his phone. He'd been avoiding hanging out with his friends because of everything that had been going on, but maybe Carlos was right. He needed a break. He needed to remember what it was like to just be, without the pressure, without the expectations. He typed back, "Yeah, let's do it. I need to clear my head." Carlos responded almost immediately, "Good. I'll pick you up at 1. Don't bail on me this time." Jason chuckled, feeling lighter than he had in days. As he went through the motions of his Saturday morning, getting ready for his day with Carlos, he couldn't help but think back to what had happened in the park. That moment of honesty, of realizing that maybe he wasn't alone in this struggle. It had made all the difference. When Carlos pulled up to his house, Jason jumped into the car, already feeling a bit more like his old self. They spent the afternoon at the arcade, playing games and laughing as they tried to outdo each other on the high scoreboards. It wasn't about grades, or expectations, or any of the things that had been weighing him down. It was about friendship, about just being. For the first time in weeks, Jason felt free. Later that evening, as they sat on the hood of Carlos' car, the stars twinkling above them, Jason looked over at his friend. "Thanks, man. For, sticking with me." Carlos shrugged, taking a sip from his soda. "You don't need to thank me. I'm your friend, Jason. That's what friends do." Jason nodded, a genuine smile spreading across his face. "I don't know what I would have done without you." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the cars drive by on the quiet streets. For the first time in what felt like forever, Jason felt like he could let go of the weight on his shoulders. He didn't have to be perfect. He didn't have to solve every problem, or keep up with everyone else. He could just be. The next week, Jason walked into school with a new sense of purpose. The pressure was still there, he knew that. But he wasn't going to let it define him anymore. He wasn't going to let the fear of failure stop him from trying, from being the person he was meant to be. In Ms. Daniels' class, as she assigned yet another project, Jason didn't feel the panic rise in his chest. He wasn't sure if he could do it all, or if he could solve every problem, but he was going to try. And that was enough. As the class went on, he found himself looking at the numbers with a new perspective. It wasn't about being the smartest or the best. It was about taking each problem, one step at a time, and knowing that no matter what, he was going to be okay. At the end of class, Ms. Daniels pulled him aside. "Jason, you've been quieter lately. How are you doing?" Jason paused, surprised by the question. He had never really talked to Ms. Daniels outside of schoolwork. But something about her tone made him feel like he could be honest. "I'm getting there," he said softly. "It's been hard. But I think I'm starting to figure things out." Ms. Daniels smiled, her eyes warm. "I'm glad to hear that. You have a lot of potential, Jason. Don't let the pressure get to you. You're more than just a grade. You're a person." Jason nodded, the weight on his shoulders feeling a little lighter. He wasn't sure what the future held, but he knew one thing for sure: he wasn't alone. He had friends who cared about him. He had teachers who saw him for who he was. And, most importantly, he was learning to see himself, not as the smart kid, or the one who always had the answers, but as someone who was just trying to be the best version of himself. And maybe that was enough. The weeks after Jason's breakthrough felt like a delicate balance between triumph and uncertainty. For the first time in months, he wasn't consumed by the weight of his genius, or the looming expectation to always be the best. Instead, he focused on the things that mattered: his friendships, his self-worth, and his growing ability to tackle challenges without drowning in anxiety. But despite this newfound sense of relief, there was always the quiet hum of doubt in the back of his mind. Could he keep this up? Would he ever be able to feel completely free from the pressure of being the perfect student? The next challenge came unexpectedly, during an assembly on the new school-wide talent competition. The flyer had been posted around the school for weeks, but Jason hadn't paid much attention. He wasn't the kind of person who usually jumped at the chance to showcase his abilities, especially not in front of a crowd. He had always preferred to blend into the background, focusing on his studies and avoiding any spotlight. But this year was different. Ms. Daniels had been talking about it in class, and some of the other students were already forming teams for various performances. Jason overheard a group of his classmates talking excitedly about forming a math-based trivia team. The idea intrigued him. But he hesitated, the old nerves creeping back. Would they want him on their team? Would they expect him to perform perfectly, to come up with all the answers? "Jason, you're going to sign up, right?" Carlos asked one day after school, as they were walking through the hall. He had caught wind of the competition, and he seemed more excited about it than Jason felt. Jason forced a smile. "I don't know. I mean, I'm not really a competition person. I don't like being the center of attention." Carlos raised an eyebrow. "I think you've been overthinking things for way too long. This could be fun. It's not about being perfect, it's just about having a good time. And who better to team up with than your genius best friend?" Jason winced at the word genius. He wasn't sure he liked the label anymore, but he couldn't deny that Carlos had a point. Maybe it would be good to challenge himself. Maybe this could be his way of facing his fear, of stepping out from the shadows and showing that he was more than just the smart kid who could always solve a problem. But there was still that nagging doubt. What if he failed? What if the pressure was too much, even for something as simple as a trivia game? "All right," Jason said, taking a deep breath. "I'll do it. But no promises." Carlos grinned. "That's the spirit. Let's do it. We'll crush it." The next few days were spent preparing for the competition. Jason met with Carlos and their other friends, Emma and Rachel, to brainstorm. The group decided to focus on a mix of subjects for their trivia team: math, history, science, and literature. Jason was more than qualified for the math and science categories, and while he wasn't as enthusiastic about history or literature, he knew he could handle it. The pressure wasn't overwhelming yet, but Jason couldn't help but feel the familiar twinge of nerves. What if he forgot an important formula during the math round? What if he messed up? There was a part of him that still feared failure, but another part, the one that had been quietly growing stronger since his conversation with Carlos, was ready to face it. As the day of the competition drew closer, Jason noticed that he was actually starting to enjoy the preparation. He felt a sense of camaraderie with his teammates, a sense of belonging that he hadn't experienced in a long time. They weren't judging him or expecting him to carry the entire team, they were in it together. The pressure, for once, felt shared. The day of the competition arrived, and the school gymnasium was buzzing with energy. Students filled the bleachers, and the stage was set up with microphones, buzzers, and a large projector screen displaying the categories for the trivia questions. Jason stood backstage with Carlos, Emma, and Rachel, his stomach flipping with nervous excitement. His team had practiced all week, but now that it was real, the weight of the moment hit him hard. "You ready for this?" Carlos asked, looking at him with a grin. Jason forced a smile, trying to push his doubts aside. "I think so. Let's just get through it." Their team was called up first. As they walked onto the stage, Jason's heart pounded in his chest. The bright lights made the room feel even larger than it was, and the sea of faces staring at them from the bleachers only amplified the pressure. But this time, it was different. Instead of the usual weight of expectation on his shoulders, there was something else, something freeing. He was here, with his friends. He was in this together with them. The competition started with an easy math round. Jason was confident, his mind racing through the questions as quickly as the buzzers were pressed. They were doing well, really well. But when the history round came up, Jason froze. He wasn't a history expert, and the questions came rapid fire, each one more challenging than the last. His team was struggling to keep up, and Jason could feel the anxiety creeping in again. He saw Emma and Carlos exchanging quick glances, trying to come up with answers on their own, but the questions kept coming faster. The pressure started to build, and Jason felt his palms sweat. This was it. This was the moment where everything could fall apart. But then, something unexpected happened. Rachel, who had been quiet for most of the competition, leaned forward and whispered, "Jason, it's okay. We've got this. You don't have to know everything." Jason's heart skipped a beat. It was such a simple thing to say, but hearing it from Rachel made all the difference. He realized that she was right. He didn't have to know everything. He didn't have to be perfect. He just needed to be himself and do the best he could. With newfound determination, Jason grabbed the buzzer and answered the next history question confidently. It wasn't perfect, but it was the right answer. And that's all that mattered. The rest of the competition went by in a blur. Jason found himself stepping up when needed, answering questions, helping his teammates, and supporting each other when things got tough. By the end of the event, they hadn't won first place, but they had done better than they ever expected. As they walked off the stage, Jason felt a surge of pride. They had made it through, not because they were perfect, but because they had supported each other every step of the way. Later that day, as Jason and his friends sat in the cafeteria, enjoying their pizza and laughing about the competition, he couldn't help but feel a sense of accomplishment. The pressure was still there, but it didn't feel as suffocating as it once had. He was learning to manage it, to take things one step at a time. Carlos nudged him with his elbow. "See? Told you you'd do great." Jason smiled, his thoughts drifting back to the one thing he had learned: it wasn't about being perfect. It was about being yourself. And maybe, just maybe, that was the key to finally feeling free. The days following the trivia competition were a whirlwind. Jason had never been particularly keen on the spotlight, but the fact that he had stepped out of his comfort zone, performed alongside his friends, and emerged with a sense of accomplishment filled him with a new kind of confidence. For the first time in ages, he felt like he was really living, not just existing under the crushing weight of expectations. Still, as the weeks passed, the lingering doubts he had been pushing down for so long began to resurface. It was as if his brain couldn't quite shake the idea that he was still playing catch-up, still trying to prove something, to both others and himself. Sure, the trivia competition was over, and he had done well. But there was always the next challenge, the next mountain to climb. And the pressure, it never really went away. Jason had never been one to voice his insecurities, not even to his closest friends. But inside, it gnawed at him. It was during one of his late-night study sessions that the full weight of the fear came crashing down. He was sitting at his desk, going over notes for an upcoming physics exam, when he found himself staring blankly at the page. The formulas were starting to blur together, and no matter how many times he reread the same section, it wasn't making sense. He rubbed his eyes, feeling the exhaustion seep into his bones. His mind was racing, and the words on the page no longer held meaning. "What's wrong with me?" he thought, his heart beginning to beat faster. He glanced at the clock, it was already past midnight. He had been studying for hours, yet every time he thought he was making progress, something else tripped him up. The fear of failure, that gnawing voice telling him that he wasn't good enough, seemed louder than ever. Just as he was about to close the book and give in to the frustration, his phone buzzed with a text from Carlos. "Hey, man, you still up? I'm having a late-night snack attack. You in?" Jason stared at the message for a moment, a faint smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. Carlos always knew how to lift his spirits, even when Jason wasn't sure how to express what was going on inside his head. "Yeah, I could use a break. See you in a bit." Jason quickly gathered his things, shutting his physics book with a sigh of relief. He knew he needed a break, but a part of him still felt like he was abandoning something important. The fear of falling behind, of not being perfect, was always there, lingering in the background, pushing him to work harder. When Jason arrived at Carlos' house, his friend was waiting in the kitchen, casually munching on some chips and laughing at a video on his phone. As soon as he saw Jason, Carlos waved him over. "Finally. I was starting to think you'd never come," Carlos joked. "What's going on? You look like you've been through a war zone." Jason chuckled weakly, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I've been studying, but it's just not clicking. I feel like I'm failing, Carlos." Carlos put down his phone and raised an eyebrow. "Jason, you're one of the smartest people I know. Failing? What are you talking about?" Jason slumped into a chair across from him. "It's not that simple. It's like no matter how hard I try, I just can't keep up anymore. I've been feeling like I'm just pretending to know what I'm doing, like I'm not really cut out for this." Carlos leaned forward, his expression serious for the first time. "Okay, listen. You're not the only one who feels like that. All of us go through moments when we think we're not good enough, but that doesn't mean we're failing. It just means we're human. And guess what? Humans don't have to be perfect." Jason stared at Carlos, unsure of how to respond. Humans don't have to be perfect, the words echoed in his mind. He had heard them before, but hearing them from Carlos, someone who knew him better than anyone else, made them feel different. "I just don't know how to stop," Jason admitted, his voice low. "I don't know how to stop pushing myself when it feels like I'm not doing enough." Carlos nodded, clearly understanding. "You've been pushing yourself hard for so long, Jason. But you can't do everything on your own. You don't have to carry all that weight. You've got people who care about you, people who believe in you. I'm one of them, okay? So when you feel like you're drowning, just remember that you don't have to do it alone." Jason's throat tightened, and for a moment, he struggled to hold back the wave of emotions that were threatening to break free. He had spent so long hiding his fears, pushing them down, that hearing Carlos' words felt like a lifeline, a reassurance that maybe he wasn't as alone as he had always felt. "Thanks," Jason said quietly, his voice cracking slightly. "I needed to hear that." Carlos grinned, tossing a chip into his mouth. "Anytime, man. Now, let's get you some junk food and a break from all that studying. You'll be fine." The next few days weren't magically perfect, but they were easier. Jason's conversations with Carlos had given him a sense of clarity he hadn't known he needed. As he faced the rest of the week, he found himself remembering what Carlos had said, "Humans don't have to be perfect." And with that realization, the pressure to be flawless began to loosen its grip. He went into his physics exam with the same preparation, but this time, he didn't carry the weight of expectation on his shoulders. He knew he had done the best he could, and that was enough. When the test was over, he felt an unfamiliar sense of peace, knowing that no matter the result, he was still Jason. His worth wasn't defined by a single test score or by his performance in any given moment. But when the exam results came in a week later, Jason's heart skipped a beat as he saw the grade on the paper. A solid A. It wasn't just the grade that mattered, though. It was the fact that Jason had faced his doubts head-on, had allowed himself to take the pressure off and embrace the imperfections. For the first time in a long time, he realized that he was enough, not because of what he did, but because of who he was. And maybe, just maybe, that was the beginning of a new chapter in his life. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Jason's heart raced as the bell rang, signaling the end of the school day. He shoved his books into his backpack and quickly made his way to the hallway, where he knew Carlos and the rest of his friends would be waiting. The last few weeks had been a roller coaster of emotions, but now, as the semester was winding down, Jason felt a sense of calm he hadn't known in years. The weight of the pressure he had constantly placed on himself was lifting, and he was learning to accept himself, flaws and all. He met Carlos at the lockers, where the usual banter began immediately. Carlos, grinning from ear to ear, had an energy that was contagious, and for the first time in a while, Jason couldn't help but match his excitement. "Hey, man. You'll never guess what," Carlos said, leaning in conspiratorially. "We got the results from the talent competition, and guess who made it to the finals?" Jason blinked, taken aback. "Wait, what? You mean us?" Carlos's grin stretched wider. "Hell yeah, you're part of the team. We did it. We made it to the finals, Jason." Jason's breath caught in his chest. "No way. I thought we were just doing it for fun. I didn't think we'd actually make it this far." Carlos slapped him on the back, laughing. "Well, maybe you didn't think so, but I knew it. I told you we had a shot. We just had to work together." Jason couldn't help but laugh along with him, the excitement bubbling up from within. He had never been one for competition, but now that they had made it to the finals, something had shifted inside him. It wasn't just about winning, it was about proving to himself that he could step up, that he didn't need to be perfect to succeed. But even as he celebrated the moment, a part of him couldn't shake the feeling of dread creeping in. What if they messed up? What if they choked on stage? The pressure was still there, even if it wasn't as overwhelming as before. Carlos noticed his hesitation and smirked. "Jason, relax. We've got this. We've been practicing for weeks, and we know our stuff. It's just like before, the only thing different now is that we've got a shot to show everyone what we're really capable of." Jason nodded slowly. Carlos was right. He had worked hard, his teammates had worked hard, and now, it was about doing their best, not about trying to be perfect. The fear was there, but it didn't have to control him. They spent the next few days in preparation, going over questions, rehearsing their answers, and tightening up their teamwork. Jason felt a sense of camaraderie he hadn't experienced before. The team was more than just a group of people competing for a prize, it was a group of friends who were in this together, sharing the highs and lows, supporting each other every step of the way. Finally, the day of the competition arrived. The school auditorium was packed with students and teachers, the energy palpable. The buzz of anticipation filled the air as the finalists were called up to the stage. Jason, standing at the back of the group, could feel the nerves settling in, but he did his best to calm himself. This wasn't about winning, it was about showing up, doing his best, and having fun with his friends. They took their seats on the stage, and Jason could feel the weight of the audience's eyes on them. It was surreal. For a moment, he wanted to bolt, just escape into the safety of the crowd. But he pushed the thought away, focusing on the faces of his teammates, who were equally nervous but equally determined. The host of the competition began with a smile, welcoming everyone to the final round. And now, let's get started. Our first question goes to Team A, the reigning champions of this year's competition. Good luck. The first few rounds went by quickly, with Jason's team performing solidly, though not spectacularly. Jason answered a few questions in his areas of strength, but when it came to the history and literature categories, he found himself hesitating. His teammates filled in the gaps, and their collaborative spirit carried them through. But the real test came in the final round, the last question of the day. The category was Advanced Science, and the question flashed up on the screen. What is the equation for gravitational potential energy, and how does it relate to an object's mass and height? Jason's stomach dropped. He had studied this, of course he had, but the question felt suddenly complicated. His mind raced, trying to pull together the correct formula. He could feel the eyes of everyone in the auditorium on him. His heart pounded in his chest. Carlos gave him a quick glance from across the table, silently urging him to step up. Jason took a deep breath, trying to clear the mental fog that had settled over him. It wasn't just about answering the question. It was about remembering that he could do this, that he had done this 1,000 times before, in class and in his personal studies. He opened his mouth, the words coming slower than he would have liked. The equation for gravitational potential energy is Pe equals mgh, where m is mass, g is acceleration due to gravity, and h is the height. For a moment, there was complete silence. Then, the host smiled broadly. Correct. And well done, Team D. The room erupted into applause. Jason let out a breath he hadn't realized he had been holding. His teammates patted him on the back, their excitement palpable. They had won the final round, securing them the victory in the title of this year's competition champions. Jason stood up with the rest of the team, feeling a rush of elation that was hard to put into words. They had done it, they had won. But as the applause washed over him, he realized something even more important. This moment wasn't about the victory or the trophy. It wasn't about proving himself to anyone. It was about the journey, the growth, the friendships, and the realization that he didn't need to be perfect to succeed. He had made it. He had faced his doubts, his fears, and his insecurities, and he had come out the other side stronger, more confident, and more willing to take risks. This wasn't just a win in a competition, it was a win in his life. As the team stood on stage, holding their trophy and smiling for the camera, Jason couldn't help but reflect on how far he had come. From the shy, anxious boy who had struggled with self-doubt, to the confident young man standing before his classmates, Jason realized that this was only the beginning. There would always be more challenges to face, more obstacles to overcome. But now, he knew that no matter what came next, he had the strength to face it head-on. And that, more than anything, was the real triumph. The adrenaline from the competition win was still coursing through Jason's veins, and it wasn't long before rumors began to spread about a new challenge that was going to take place within the school. The announcement came during the morning announcements, and Jason's curiosity was piqued as he listened. Attention, students! "We are excited to announce the launch of the annual Innovators Challenge," the principal's voice echoed over the intercom. "This is a competition where teams of students work together to create something innovative, a project that can potentially change the world around us. Whether it's a new technology, a creative solution to a problem, or an entirely new concept, we want to see what you can come up with. The winning team will receive a scholarship and a chance to present their project to a panel of experts from around the city." Jason's mind raced as he processed the announcement. A competition like this could be huge. Not just for the prize, but for the opportunities it could bring. It would be a chance to showcase his skills, to work with his team, and maybe even prove that he was capable of something bigger than just school competitions. He had been part of one contest, now, he wanted to push himself further. But with that excitement came the doubt, would they really be able to pull it off? This wasn't a simple quiz or trivia contest. This was about innovation, creativity, and building something from the ground up. Jason had no idea where to start, and he wasn't sure if he was ready to take on something so ambitious. As the bell rang and students poured out of their classrooms, Carlos and the rest of the team gathered around in their usual spot. "I heard about the Innovators Challenge," Carlos said, a grin already spreading across his face. "What do you think? You in?" Jason hesitated for a moment. It wasn't just the size of the competition that intimidated him, it was the unknown. "I don't know, it sounds like a big deal. I'm not sure we're ready for something like this." Carlos waved his hand dismissively. "Jason, we've already proven that we can handle challenges. This is just another step up. You can't back out now." Jason wasn't entirely convinced, but Carlos' confidence was infectious. Maybe they could do this. After all, they had done it before. What was the worst that could happen? "Okay, I'm in," Jason said, trying to muster a sense of excitement. "But we need a solid plan. We need to think of something that's actually going to stand out." "We will," Carlos assured him. "We've got this." The following days were a whirlwind of brainstorming sessions, late-night discussions, and collaboration. Jason and his team tossed around ideas, some more outlandish than others, but none of them felt quite right. They wanted to create something innovative, something that would leave a lasting impression. The problem was that there were so many directions they could go in, and they needed to narrow it down to something feasible yet groundbreaking. It wasn't until one particularly frustrating afternoon, when Jason was working alone in the library, that the idea struck him. He had been researching new technologies for inspiration when he stumbled across an article about renewable energy sources and how there were still so many untapped possibilities for improving energy efficiency. That's when it hit him, a solution that could revolutionize the way people thought about energy consumption. Jason's mind began to race. He scribbled notes on the back of his notebook, connecting dots between the research he was reading and the goals of the Innovators Challenge. What if they could design a product, something small and practical, that could reduce energy waste and improve efficiency in everyday appliances? It didn't need to be a full-fledged solar panel or wind turbine, but something people could easily incorporate into their daily lives to save energy. He smiled to himself, feeling the excitement return. This was it. This was their idea. The next day, Jason shared his concept with the team. They were immediately intrigued, though some of them were skeptical about the complexity of the project. "You really think we can design something like this in time?" Sarah asked, raising an eyebrow. "This isn't like a trivia contest. This is a huge deal." Jason nodded. "I know, but think about it. We're not inventing something from scratch. We're improving on an existing idea, taking energy efficiency and making it more accessible. People already care about saving energy, we just need to give them an easy way to do it." Carlos, always the optimist, was quick to agree. "Yeah, I'm with Jason on this. We have the skills. We just need to break it down into manageable steps and get to work." After several more brainstorming sessions and a bit of trial and error, the team settled on a concept, a smart energy-saving plug that could be inserted into household appliances to help monitor and control their energy usage. It would be able to track the energy consumption of each device and provide suggestions on how to optimize it, reducing waste and saving money in the long run. It was simple, practical, and most importantly, innovative. But there was still a long road ahead. They had to design the product, create a prototype, and figure out how to present their idea to the judges. They would need to come up with a pitch, design a working model, and perfect every detail of the product if they wanted to stand a chance of winning. Jason was both excited and overwhelmed. The competition was fierce, and there was a lot riding on this project. But at the same time, he felt a sense of purpose. This wasn't just about competing, it was about making a difference. They weren't just creating a product, they were creating something that could actually help people, something that could change the way people thought about energy consumption. And as the days turned into weeks, Jason's confidence grew. The team worked late into the night, overcoming obstacles, perfecting their design, and learning from their mistakes. And with each passing day, Jason realized that this challenge was just as much about personal growth as it was about the competition. They weren't just trying to win, they were trying to push themselves further than they ever thought possible. By the time the final presentation day arrived, Jason stood before the judges with a feeling he hadn't experienced in a long time, a sense of pride. The product wasn't perfect, but it was a reflection of their hard work, their creativity, and their commitment to something bigger than themselves. Now, it was time to see if it was enough. Jason couldn't help but feel the weight of the moment as he stood backstage, his hands slick with sweat despite the cool air. The Innovators Challenge finals were mere minutes away, and his heart was racing. He glanced over at his team, who were all equally tense but trying to hide it behind forced smiles. Carlos, ever the optimist, gave Jason a thumbs up. "We've got this," he said with a grin. "No matter what happens, we've already come so far." Jason nodded, but his mind was still a whirl of doubt. The project had come together over the past few weeks, and it was something they were all proud of. Their energy-saving plug, though not perfect, was a real solution to a problem that affected everyday people. But now that they were standing on the precipice of the competition, it felt like everything was on the line. There was a hum of activity as other teams made their final preparations. Some were making last-minute tweaks to their projects, while others huddled together nervously, rehearsing their presentations. It was clear that the competition was fierce. Every team had put in months of effort, and everyone seemed to have a brilliant idea. Jason's team wasn't the only one with an impressive concept. Across the room, another team presented a cutting-edge app designed to help people track their carbon footprint. Another had designed a low-cost, portable water purifier for rural communities. And there was a team that had created a sustainable food packaging solution made entirely from plant-based materials. It was incredible to see how innovative the students were. But Jason didn't have time to compare their project to anyone else's. He had to focus on what they had worked so hard to create. They had developed their energy-saving plug with a level of care and attention that he believed could set them apart. The presentation wasn't just about explaining how it worked, it was about showing the judges the passion and commitment behind their idea. "I know this is a lot of pressure," Sarah said, breaking Jason out of his thoughts. "But we've worked so hard for this. Let's just do our best, okay?" "Right," Jason agreed, trying to shake off the nerves. "We've got this." As the announcer's voice boomed over the loudspeakers, calling for the teams to take their places, Jason's team took their positions at the front of the stage. The lights were bright, almost blinding, but Jason didn't mind. He took a deep breath, steadied himself, and waited for his turn to speak. "Good luck, everyone," Carlos whispered before the presentation began. The judges were seated at a long table, watching with critical eyes. Their expressions were unreadable as they looked over the team's projects. Jason could see that some of them were already nodding in approval, while others were making notes, jotting down observations. The pressure was building, but Jason reminded himself to breathe. This was just another moment, another step forward. Finally, it was time for Jason's team to present. The announcer called their name, and the spotlight shifted onto them. Carlos took the lead. He was the natural speaker of the group, and he could usually hold the audience's attention with his confidence and enthusiasm. As he began, Jason stood beside him, trying to maintain composure. It was surreal to be standing in front of so many people, but he reminded himself that this wasn't about impressing them, it was about presenting the work they had done together. Carlos launched into the introduction, explaining the problem of energy waste in everyday household appliances. Energy consumption is one of the biggest contributors to climate change. But even as we strive to use renewable energy sources, we are still wasting energy on a daily basis, whether it's leaving devices plugged in when not in use or using inefficient appliances. Our team has designed a simple, practical solution to this problem, the Smart Energy Plug. The spotlight shifted to Sarah, who stepped forward and began explaining the mechanics of the device. The Smart Energy Plug is an energy-saving device that can be used in any household appliance. Once plugged in, it tracks the energy usage of the appliance, providing feedback on how to optimize energy consumption. It works by analyzing power usage patterns and providing suggestions for when to unplug the device or how to adjust its settings to reduce unnecessary consumption. As Sarah spoke, Jason activated the demo model they had built, and the screen behind them displayed real-time data showing how the Smart Energy Plug tracked energy usage. The device was small, unobtrusive, and easy to use. The crowd seemed engaged, watching intently as the device displayed energy-saving tips and alerts. Jason stepped forward to explain the data collection aspect of the plug. The device collects data through a simple app, which shows the user detailed information about their energy consumption habits. It also offers recommendations for reducing energy waste, like suggesting times to unplug appliances or automatically turning off power when not in use. For the first time since the competition started, Jason felt a spark of confidence. He could see that the judges were interested. They weren't just nodding, they were actually engaging with the presentation, asking thoughtful questions about the product's design and its potential impact. Do you have any data showing how much energy this could actually save in a typical household? One of the judges asked. Jason smiled. He had prepared for this question. Yes, we do, he said, pulling out a detailed chart. Based on current usage patterns, a household that uses our plug could save up to 15% on their annual energy bill. Over time, that could add up to hundreds of dollars in savings, all while reducing overall energy consumption. The judges seemed impressed, but Jason knew that the next part of the presentation would be the hardest. This wasn't just about the device anymore, it was about the impact it could have. Could they convey the real-world importance of their innovation? Carlos took over for the final part of the pitch. Our Smart Energy Plug isn't just a product. It's a part of a larger movement toward reducing waste and improving energy efficiency in homes around the world. Our goal is to make this technology accessible to everyone, regardless of their income or tech experience. We want to empower people to take control of their energy usage, while also helping to protect the environment for future generations. There was a long pause after the final words of their presentation. Jason could feel the weight of the silence as the judges discussed among themselves. The uncertainty crept back into his mind. Had they done enough? Would their concept stand out against the competition? Then, the head judge cleared his throat. Thank you, Team D. That was an impressive presentation. We'll be sure to take your idea into consideration. Please wait backstage while we deliberate. As the team stepped off the stage, Jason's nerves were still on edge. But as they huddled together backstage, waiting for the judge's final decision, a sense of pride filled him. No matter what happened, they had done something incredible. They had faced their fears, worked together, and created something that could genuinely make a difference. And that, Jason realized, was enough. The tension backstage was palpable. Jason's team huddled together in a small, dimly lit room, the excitement of their presentation slowly giving way to a quiet anxiety. They had done everything they could, practiced their pitch, fine-tuned the device, and put their hearts into the project. Now, it was out of their hands. "Do you think we did enough?" Sarah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Her brow was furrowed, her fingers anxiously tapping on the edge of the table. Jason glanced at her and then at the rest of the team. They all had that same look, anxiety mixed with the pride of knowing they had pushed themselves to the limit. "I don't know," he admitted. "I mean, I think we gave them a solid presentation. We showed them why this matters, right?" Carlos, always the optimist, grinned. "I'm not worried. We nailed it. I could see their faces, they were into it. Besides, we've got the best idea in the room." Jason couldn't help but smile at Carlos' unshakable confidence, even if his own nerves made it hard to fully embrace it. "I hope you're right." The minutes felt like hours as they waited. The sound of footsteps and voices outside the room only heightened their anxiety. Every now and then, a team member would glance at the clock, as if willing time to move faster. The worst part was not knowing how the other teams had done. The more Jason thought about it, the more the doubts crept in. What if their idea wasn't as groundbreaking as they thought? What if the judges had already made up their minds? And then, at last, the door opened. "Team D," the announcer's voice rang out, and Jason's stomach flipped. "The judges have made their decision. Please come to the main stage." A rush of nervous energy surged through Jason's team as they stood up. Their legs felt like lead, but they followed the announcer down the hall, into the spotlight. The crowd's murmurs grew louder as they took their place on the stage, their hearts beating in sync with the rhythm of the room. The judges were seated at the front of the stage, their serious expressions giving no hint as to what they were thinking. The head judge stood up, holding a microphone, and the room fell silent. "Thank you to all the teams for your hard work and dedication," he began, his voice carrying authority. "Each of you presented impressive and innovative ideas that could make a real impact on the world. But as with any competition, there can only be one winner." Jason's breath caught in his chest as he waited for the next words. After a dramatic pause, the head judge smiled. "And the winner of this year's Innovators Challenge is Team D, with their Smart Energy Plug." Jason's heart skipped a beat. His team stood frozen for a moment, disbelief washing over them. The roar of applause that followed felt like it was happening in slow motion. Carlos was the first to jump up, raising his hands in triumph. Sarah let out a gasp, her eyes wide with astonishment. Jason stood, rooted to the spot, as the reality of the moment finally sank in. "We did it," Sarah whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. Carlos practically leaped onto the stage, shaking hands with the judges. "Thank you so much. This is incredible." Jason followed behind, still in a daze. His feet felt light, as if he were floating. He had imagined this moment countless times, but nothing had prepared him for the rush of emotions that flooded over him. His team had won. Their hard work, the late nights, the endless brainstorming sessions, it had all paid off. They had achieved something remarkable. The head judge extended his hand to shake Jason's. "Congratulations, Team D. You've created something that not only shows innovation but also a deep understanding of the challenges we face in energy consumption. We believe your product has real potential to make an impact, and we look forward to seeing it evolve." Jason took the judge's hand, his voice barely above a whisper. "Thank you. Thank you so much." The applause continued as the team members took their places at the front of the stage to accept their trophy and the scholarship award. But for Jason, the most overwhelming part wasn't the prize, it was the feeling of validation. They had worked so hard, and in that moment, it felt like the world had just opened up before them. They had earned their place among the best. The judges congratulated the team and handed them a certificate for the scholarship. "Use this opportunity well, the head judge advised. The world needs young innovators like you to make it a better place. After the ceremony, the team stood together off to the side, still processing what had just happened. The weight of the victory had settled in, but the excitement was still bubbling over. I can't believe it, Carlos said, grinning ear to ear. We actually won. It feels unreal, Sarah added, laughing. I keep expecting someone to wake me up from this dream. Jason looked at his teammates, a deep sense of gratitude filling him. He had gone from doubting whether they were ready for this challenge to standing on the stage, holding their trophy. They had made it. Thank you, all of you, Jason said, his voice full of emotion. We couldn't have done this without each other. We pushed ourselves harder than I ever thought possible, and it worked. We did something incredible. As the team celebrated and shared hugs, Jason's thoughts wandered to what came next. They had won this competition, but there was still so much more to do. This victory was just the beginning. They had the chance to take their idea to the next level, to refine the product and bring it to market. The possibilities were endless. And as Jason stood there, surrounded by his friends, he realized that the real victory wasn't just about winning a prize. It was about the journey they had taken together, the challenges they had overcome, the lessons they had learned, and the way they had grown as individuals and as a team. They had set out to create something that mattered. And now, the world was watching. Jason smiled. The future was bright, and he was ready for whatever came next. The days following the Innovators Challenge felt like a whirlwind. Jason and his team were now local heroes, their victory plastered across social media and local news outlets. They had captured the attention of everyone from their school community to business leaders, all of whom were eager to see the future of their energy-saving device, the Smart Energy Plug. But as Jason sat in his room, staring at the trophy on his desk, he couldn't shake the feeling that the real challenge was just beginning. Yes, they had won a competition, but now they had to turn their idea into a tangible product that could actually make a difference. And that was no easy task. Jason's phone buzzed. It was a text from Carlos. Carlos, we need to meet. Got some big news. Let's go over the next steps for the plug. Jason quickly typed a reply, then grabbed his jacket. His mind raced with possibilities. The scholarship had opened doors to countless opportunities, and they had the resources to take their project to new heights. But with all the excitement, he couldn't help but feel a knot of uncertainty. They had been able to pull this off as students, but now they were entering the realm of real-world business. Could they actually succeed in the marketplace? When Jason arrived at the cafe where the team had agreed to meet, Carlos was already there, seated at a table with his laptop open in front of him. Hey! Jason greeted him, sliding into the seat across from Carlos. What's the big news? Carlos grinned, a gleam of excitement in his eyes. We've been approached by a major tech company. They want to collaborate with us. Jason blinked. Wait, what? Who? Carlos handed him a folder with a company logo on the front. This is from Ecotech Solutions. They're a big player in the clean energy sector. Apparently, they've seen our presentation and are interested in investing in our plug. They want to meet with us next week. Jason's mind spun as he read through the details. Ecotech Solutions was a leader in sustainable technology, with products that focused on reducing energy consumption and lowering carbon footprints. They had the resources to help take the Smart Energy Plug to the next level, but it also meant they'd be working under the scrutiny of a big corporation. This is huge, Jason murmured, feeling both elated and intimidated by the news. But do we know what they're looking for exactly? What's the deal here? Carlos leaned back in his chair, eyes narrowing in thought. They're offering to fund further development of the plug. But here's the catch, they're asking us to give up a portion of ownership and allow them to have a say in the direction we take with the product. Jason exhaled sharply. It was a lot to process. On one hand, this was an incredible opportunity. Ecotech had the expertise and the money to push their project forward faster than they could alone. Carlos nodded, understanding the weight of Jason's words. I hear you. But think about this, if we don't take this opportunity, someone else might. They're not the only company out there that wants in on this. But with them, we're getting an experienced partner. They can help us make this plug even better than we could alone. The conversation hung in the air, both of them silent as they weighed the pros and cons. Jason couldn't deny the truth in Carlos' words. With Ecotech's support, they could turn their small project into something that could truly change the way people used energy. But was it worth the price of giving up some control? Before Jason could speak again, his phone buzzed in his pocket. It was a message from Sarah. Sarah, got something I need to talk to you about. Can we meet up later? Jason looked at Carlos. I think we should get the team's thoughts on this. I'm not sure we can make a decision without talking it through with everyone. Carlos agreed, and they quickly made plans to meet up with Sarah later that afternoon. Jason's mind was still spinning, but he knew they couldn't make this decision without considering all angles. There was no turning back once they signed the deal, and he wanted to make sure they were all on the same page. As they left the cafe, the world outside seemed different, brighter, but filled with new challenges. The future of the smart energy plug was on the line, and Jason couldn't help but wonder, would they be able to navigate this new chapter without losing sight of what truly mattered? The team was about to step into the big leagues. The question was, would they be ready? The meeting with Sarah was set for 3 p.m., and by the time Jason arrived at their usual spot in the library, he was already feeling the weight of the decision pressing down on him. Carlos was sitting at one of the tables near the back, nervously fiddling with his laptop, while Sarah was flipping through a textbook. They both looked up as Jason approached, their faces filled with anticipation. All right, so what's going on? Jason asked, sliding into the seat beside Sarah. Sarah closed the textbook with a soft sigh and leaned forward. I've been thinking about the Ecotech proposal a lot, and I think we need to really weigh the pros and cons. But there's more to it. I've been talking to some professors about what comes next, and I've heard some things that have me concerned. Jason raised an eyebrow. What do you mean? What kind of things? Well, Sarah began slowly, there's the obvious stuff, like losing some control of the project. But I've also heard that Ecotech has a history of pushing companies they invest in to take certain directions. I mean, they're not exactly known for keeping their partner's vision intact if it doesn't align with their bottom line. Jason's stomach tightened. That was exactly what he had feared, giving up the vision of the project just to make money. He shot a glance at Carlos, who was looking equally uneasy. Carlos nodded. I've got the same concerns. But at the same time, they could help us grow so much faster than we ever could on our own. This thing could be in every home across the country if we go with them. Jason took a deep breath and ran a hand through his hair. I don't know. It feels like we're at a crossroads. We've got this incredible opportunity, but it's not just about money. It's about staying true to what we've always believed in. What if we sign this deal and then regret it? What if we lose our way? Sarah's eyes softened. I get that, Jason. But we can't ignore what this could mean for us, especially for the people who need the plug the most. We've always wanted to make a difference, and Ecotech could be the key to that. We can still set the tone for how the product is developed. We just need to be careful about how we structure the deal and make sure we maintain some level of control. Jason thought about it for a moment, weighing Sarah's words carefully. She had a point. If they didn't take the offer, they could be stuck as a small, niche product with limited impact. But if they did take the offer, they'd have the power to make a real difference on a larger scale. The stakes were higher now, and they had to make sure they weren't blinded by the potential for fame or success. Carlos broke the silence. So, what do we do? We could counter their offer, ask for more control, or maybe find a different company that gives us the freedom we need. But if we do that, are we gambling with the future of the plug? Jason ran his fingers over his forehead, feeling a headache beginning to form. He thought back to the day they'd come up with the idea, the excitement, the dream of helping people save energy and cut down on waste. That had always been their goal. But now it felt like everything was more complicated. This wasn't just about ideas anymore, it was about navigating a business world that they knew little about. I don't know, Jason admitted quietly. It feels like we're stepping into a whole new world, and we're not prepared for it. I want to take the plug to every home, but I don't want to lose sight of why we started this in the first place. Sarah's voice was steady as she spoke. We don't have to give up everything. We can negotiate terms that protect our vision. This is about finding balance. We don't need to let fear of change hold us back, but we also can't rush into this blindly. We need a plan. Jason looked at his teammates, the people he'd come to trust more than anyone else in this world. They had been through so much together. And now, more than ever, they needed to make the right decision, not just for themselves, but for the people who were relying on them to change the world. He let out a long breath. I think we need to take a step back. We need to get a lawyer, someone who can help us navigate this. If we're going to sign anything, we need to make sure we're not giving up everything we've worked for. Carlos grinned, relieved that Jason was beginning to see the bigger picture. That's what I'm talking about. Let's get the legal advice we need, but at least we know we're not alone in this. I agree, Sarah added. But also, we need to make sure we're not getting too caught up in the business side of things. At the end of the day, this is about the plug, and we can't forget that. Jason nodded, feeling a weight lifting off his shoulders. For the first time in a while, he felt like they had a clear path forward. It wouldn't be easy, but they were in this together. They had the passion, the drive, and now they were going to make sure they had the right support to get the smart energy plug into the hands of the people who needed it most. I'm with you guys, Jason said. Let's make sure we do this the right way. We've got one shot at this, and we can't afford to mess it up. They all agreed, their resolve stronger than ever. With the right support, they could navigate the world of business and still keep their integrity intact. It wouldn't be simple, but Jason believed in them. He believed in their vision. The smart energy plug wasn't just a product. It was a symbol of everything they stood for. And they weren't going to let anything stand in the way of their dream. The following week was a blur of emails, phone calls, and preparation. The team had secured a lawyer to help them navigate the delicate negotiations with Ecotech. With each passing day, the excitement about the future of their project was tempered by the gravity of the decision they had to make. Every time they met, the same question lingered: could they protect their vision while partnering with a powerful corporation? Jason spent hours reviewing the contract, line by line. Every word felt heavy with potential consequences. He was starting to understand the language of the business world, but it was still a lot to process. The team had to make sure that their core values, the simplicity of the smart energy plug and its mission to help people save energy, wouldn't be lost in the shuffle. The day of the meeting arrived. Jason, Carlos, and Sarah stood in the conference room at Ecotech's headquarters, staring at the glossy, polished walls around them. It was hard to believe they had come this far. Only a few months ago, they were just a group of high school students with a big idea. Now, they were sitting at the table with some of the most influential people in the clean tech industry. The Ecotech representatives, two middle-aged men, John and Michael, greeted them warmly. Jason extended his hand to John, a tall man in a crisp suit, his handshake firm but friendly. Thanks for coming down, Jason. Carlos, Sarah, John said, smiling as they all took their seats. We've been very impressed by your work. Your innovation is exactly what the industry needs, and we're excited about the potential for our partnership. Jason nodded, trying to steady his nerves. This was it. The moment that could change everything. Thank you for the opportunity, he said, his voice steady but his mind racing. We're thrilled to be here. Carlos leaned forward, looking at John intently. We appreciate your interest in the smart energy plug. We've built this from the ground up, and it's important to us that its mission stays intact. This isn't just a product, it's a way to make energy-saving technology accessible to everyone. Michael, the other Ecotech representative, smiled kindly. We understand your concern, Carlos. We're here to support you. Our goal is to get the plug into as many homes as possible. We can provide funding, resources, and marketing expertise to make that happen. But in return, we'll need to have a role in the development process. We'll need some oversight. Jason felt a knot form in his stomach. This was where the real negotiation would begin. He glanced at Sarah, who was looking at the two men with a mix of curiosity and caution. We're not opposed to working with you, Sarah said, her voice calm but assertive. But we're firm about maintaining control over the product's design and its accessibility. This has always been about simplicity. We want to make sure it remains affordable and easy for anyone to use. John exchanged a look with Michael before speaking again. Of course, we value your vision. But as with any product, there needs to be some flexibility. We've seen how much potential this plug has, and we believe it can reach a much wider audience with some adjustments. We may need to alter the design slightly, maybe even introduce a premium version for larger homes or businesses. Jason's heart sank. This was what he had feared. The smart energy plug was meant to be a universal solution, affordable, simple, and effective. If they made a premium version, would it become just another expensive gadget? We're not interested in creating a version of the plug that only caters to the wealthy, Jason said firmly. The purpose of this project is to make energy savings accessible to everyone. We don't want to lose that. Michael looked thoughtful, but there was a hint of impatience in his eyes. I understand, Jason. But you have to realize that scaling up means costs increase. And if you want to compete in this market, you need to meet those costs. We're talking about distribution networks, marketing, and research and development. There are also logistical challenges that come with producing a product at the scale we're envisioning. Carlos, ever the mediator, leaned in. We get that. But we need to be sure we're not compromising the heart of the product. If it becomes too complex or too expensive, it won't have the same impact. That's the whole reason we created it in the first place. John's face softened. I hear you. What if we meet halfway? We could introduce a more advanced version, but we'll also keep the basic model intact for the broader market. We'll make sure the simple version remains as affordable as possible. And we can help you with production and distribution costs so that you don't lose sight of your mission. Jason and Sarah exchanged a glance. This was a reasonable compromise. But the nagging feeling in the back of Jason's mind wouldn't go away. Could they really trust Ecotech to keep their vision intact, or would they slowly start pushing for more changes? After a long silence, Jason spoke. We'd be willing to consider a version for larger homes or businesses, but only if the basic model remains our primary focus. The product has to stay simple, effective, and affordable. If you agree to those terms, we're on board. John smiled, his demeanor shifting to one of relief. That's more than fair. We want this to work for everyone involved. We're not trying to take over, we're here to help you grow. If we can keep the heart of the project intact and still make it viable on a larger scale, I think we can do something amazing together. Jason felt a surge of hope, though the weight of the decision still lingered. This was a breakthrough. They hadn't agreed to everything Ecotech wanted, but they had found a middle ground. We'll have our lawyer draft the terms, Jason said, feeling a sense of control returning. We'll review the contract and make sure everything is in line with what we've agreed on. As they wrapped up the meeting, Jason couldn't help but feel a sense of accomplishment. They had stood their ground, and it looked like they had secured a partnership that would help their vision grow without compromising their values. As they left the conference room and walked into the crisp afternoon air, Jason turned to his team. We did it. We stuck to our guns and made sure our vision stayed intact. But we're just getting started. Sarah smiled. It feels like we've taken a huge step forward. But we still have a lot of work to do. Carlos clapped Jason on the back. The hard part's over. Now, we make it happen. Jason looked out over the city, the sun setting behind the towering buildings. For the first time in a long while, he felt truly excited for the future. This was only the beginning. The next few weeks were a whirlwind. With the agreement in place, the smart energy plug was no longer just a dream, it was a reality. Jason, Carlos, and Sarah had worked tirelessly to prepare for the next phase: production, marketing, and distribution. Ecotech had provided the resources they needed to scale the project, and the team had been given the crucial freedom to guide the development of the plug. The first few days after the agreement felt like they were living in a dream. Every time Jason walked into the office, the possibilities of what they had just achieved hit him like a freight train. There was a sense of urgency now, but also an overwhelming sense of responsibility. The smart energy plug had the potential to change the world, and it wasn't just their future on the line, it was everyone who would benefit from this revolutionary technology. Sarah and Carlos had taken charge of working with Ecotech's engineers to refine the product. They were focused on ensuring that the basic model remained affordable, user-friendly, and energy efficient. They also worked on the advanced version for larger homes and businesses, making sure it didn't compromise the core mission of the product. Meanwhile, Jason was tasked with overseeing the marketing strategy. The pressure was immense. He had to make sure the plug would reach as many people as possible, and he knew that a powerful marketing campaign was crucial to that success. But every time he thought about it, his mind raced with questions: would people actually buy it? Would they understand its value? Was he doing the right thing by allowing Ecotech to play such a big role in its development? One evening, Jason sat alone in his office, his laptop open in front of him. He stared at the marketing plan he had been working on for hours. The numbers, the statistics, the projected reach, they were all there, but something didn't feel right. He couldn't shake the feeling that they were about to embark on a journey that might change them forever. The decision to partner with Ecotech had been hard, but he felt it had been the right one. The pressure of making the plug a success weighed on him, but at least they were making progress. They were closer than ever to launching the product to the world. A knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. It was Sarah, looking as determined as ever. "Hey, Jason," she said, walking in. "Got a minute?" "Of course, come on in," Jason replied, smiling but feeling the weight of the moment pressing down on him. "What's up?" "We need to talk," Sarah said, her tone serious. "About the launch." Jason leaned back in his chair. "What's going on?" "We're all set, right? We've got everything ready to go. The production's locked in, the marketing campaign's nearly finalized." "I know," Sarah interrupted, sitting across from him. "But I've been thinking. We've been so focused on getting the product out there, that I'm not sure we've really thought through the bigger picture. The product's great, but we need to make sure that it doesn't just go on shelves and get lost in the shuffle. It has to stand for something. It has to have a story." Jason nodded, understanding where Sarah was coming from. "You're right. We've always talked about how the plug isn't just about saving money, it's about saving the planet, about making a real difference. We've lost sight of that a bit, haven't we?" "Exactly," Sarah said, leaning forward. "We need to remind people of that. We need a story, a message that's clear and resonates with everyone. Otherwise, it's just another gadget. We can't let that happen." Carlos entered the room, sensing the gravity of the conversation. "You two talking about the launch?" "I've been thinking about it too. The message needs to be more than just energy saving. We're talking about people's future, about creating a cleaner world for the next generation." Jason nodded. "Yeah. But how do we frame that message? How do we tell the world why this product matters?" I've been working on something, Carlos said, pulling out a notebook. He opened it to a page filled with ideas and scribbled notes. What if we market it as more than just an energy-saving tool? What if we position it as a movement? A step toward a more sustainable world, where everyone has access to clean energy, no matter their income. That's powerful, Sarah said, her eyes lighting up. It's not just a product. It's a way of life, a change in mindset. We're giving people the power to reduce their carbon footprint, to contribute to a better world. It's a call to action. Jason's heart started to race. This was the kind of message they needed, something that connected emotionally with people. It wasn't just about the plug. It was about a movement for a cleaner, more sustainable future. That's exactly what we need, Jason said, standing up and pacing around the room. We've been so focused on the logistics, the business side of things, that we forgot why we started this in the first place. This is bigger than us. This is about the world. Carlos grinned. Exactly. And that's the story we need to tell. We've always said we wanted to make a difference, and now we've got the chance. Let's make sure everyone knows what we stand for. Sarah added, we've got the product. We've got the support. Now we need to remind people why it matters. Jason's mind was racing with ideas. They needed to make sure that the launch wasn't just about selling the plug, it needed to be about selling the vision. The plug wasn't just a tool, it was the first step in a global movement toward sustainability. They were about to start something that could change the world. I think we've got our direction, Jason said, his voice filled with conviction. Let's build the campaign around the movement. Let's make sure everyone knows they're part of something bigger than just buying a product. They're joining a movement for a better future. The team spent the rest of the evening brainstorming, refining their message, and putting together a campaign that would capture the hearts and minds of their audience. The smart energy plug would no longer just be a gadget. It would be a symbol of a brighter, more sustainable future. As Jason walked out of the office that night, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. They had a long road ahead of them, but now, more than ever, he believed in what they were doing. The world was about to see what they had created, and they were going to make sure it was more than just a product, they were going to make it a movement. The months of hard work, late nights, and countless meetings had all led up to this moment, the official launch of the Smart Energy Plug. The countdown had begun, and Jason couldn't help but feel a mixture of excitement and anxiety. This was the moment that would determine whether their idea could change the world or fade into obscurity. With Ecotech's backing in the revamped marketing campaign, they were ready to take the leap. But Jason knew that even with the best resources and support, success wasn't guaranteed. The world was full of competing voices, and in the saturated tech market, standing out was a monumental task. It was early on a Monday morning when they gathered at the office for the final preparations. The team had spent the weekend finalizing their promotional materials, testing the product for the last time, and rehearsing the presentation. They were ready. All right, team, Jason said, pacing in front of the conference table. This is it. We've got one shot to make this work. We've put everything we have into this project, and we've got to make sure the world sees what we've built. It's not just about selling a product. It's about showing people how they can make a difference, how they can be part of a movement for a sustainable future. Carlos and Sarah nodded, determination written on their faces. The stress was evident, but so was their confidence. They had faith in the product, in their vision, and in each other. Jason pulled up the final presentation on the screen. We're launching the campaign on all platforms, social media, TV, radio, and digital ads. The message is simple, the Smart Energy Plug is more than just a gadget. It's the first step toward a cleaner, more sustainable world. You can be part of it, no matter who you are or where you come from. This is your chance to take action. Sarah stepped up, addressing the team. We've got the press conference at 10 a.m. After that, we'll go live with the website. We've prepped the media kit, and we've got some influencer partnerships lined up to help us spread the word. This is going to be big. But we can't forget that it's all about the story, the movement. That's what people will connect with. Jason turned to Carlos. How's the product on your end? Carlos grinned. We're good to go. The plug's been tested, retested, and is ready for mass production. I've been on the phone with the factory, they've got everything lined up for distribution. All right, Jason said, taking a deep breath. Let's do this. The press conference was held at Ecotech's headquarters, a sleek building in the heart of the city. The room was filled with journalists, bloggers, influencers, and executives from both Ecotech and the Smart Energy team. As Jason stood at the front of the room, facing the crowd, he felt the weight of the moment. This wasn't just a product launch. This was the culmination of months of hard work, sleepless nights, and the hope that they could truly make a difference in the world. The stage lights shone down on him as he began speaking. Thank you all for being here today. We're about to introduce something that we believe will change the way we think about energy usage, something that will make energy saving accessible to everyone, no matter where they live or how much money they make. This isn't just a product. It's the beginning of a movement. He paused, letting the words sink in. The room was silent, all eyes on him. Sarah and Carlos stood by his side, their expressions a mix of nervousness and excitement. We've all heard about the growing need for clean, sustainable energy. But what if we told you that you could make a difference, today? What if we told you that you could help save energy, reduce your carbon footprint, and save money, all with one simple device? Jason continued. That's what the Smart Energy Plug is. A solution that's simple, effective, and, most importantly, accessible. Jason's heart raced as he glanced at the crowd. He knew the stakes were high, but he also knew they had a powerful story to tell. Today, we invite you to be part of something bigger than just a product. This is a movement for a sustainable future, and we want you to be part of it. With that, Jason gestured toward the large screen behind him, which displayed a video showcasing the Smart Energy Plug in action, showing people of all walks of life using the device in their homes, cutting down their energy usage, and making a real difference. As the video ended, the room erupted in applause. Jason smiled, his confidence growing. This was it, this was the moment they'd been working toward. The press conference had gone better than he could have imagined. They'd connected with the audience, and now it was time for the world to see the Smart Energy Plug for what it really was. The next few days were a blur of media coverage, interviews, and social media posts. The campaign went viral. Influencers shared their experiences with the Smart Energy Plug, and journalists praised the innovative design and the message of sustainability. Customers began placing orders, and soon, the first wave of the product was sold out. But it wasn't just the sales that had Jason most excited. It was the feedback, the stories from everyday people who were using the plug to save money and reduce their energy usage. They were seeing results, and they were talking about it. Jason sat in his office late one night, scrolling through social media posts about the Smart Energy Plug. People were sharing their success stories, showing off their energy bills before and after using the plug. The message was spreading, and it was clear, they had tapped into something powerful. He leaned back in his chair, a sense of accomplishment washing over him. They had done it. They had started a movement. It wasn't just about a product anymore, it was about changing the way people thought about energy and the future of the planet. And they had only just begun. The team gathered later that week to celebrate their success. They were proud of what they'd achieved, but Jason knew that this was just the beginning. There was still so much more to do. The Smart Energy Plug was now in homes around the world, and the movement was growing. But Jason was ready for whatever came next. The world was paying attention now. The success of the Smart Energy Plug had been nothing short of extraordinary. What had started as a humble idea in a small office had blossomed into a global movement for sustainability. Orders were pouring in from all over the world. The team was busier than ever, working overtime to meet demand, refine the product, and ensure that the vision they had fought so hard for was being realized. Jason stood by the window in his office, looking out over the city. The view had always been a source of comfort for him, but now, with the smart energy plug on the verge of truly changing the world, it felt like a reflection of everything they had worked for. A small seed of an idea had grown into something much larger, and they were just getting started. He thought about the long road that had brought them here, how they'd been laughed at, doubted, and dismissed. But now, they had something no one could deny. The plug was real, and it was helping people. That was all that mattered. "Hey, Jason," Sarah's voice pulled him from his thoughts. She entered the room, holding a tablet in her hand, her face lit with excitement. "You've got to see this." Jason turned to her, his heart beating faster. He had a feeling he knew what this was about. "What's going on?" he asked. Sarah showed him the tablet, and his eyes widened as he read the latest article. It was a feature on Smart Energy Plug in one of the biggest tech magazines. The headline was bold, the words impossible to ignore: "Smart Energy Plug, the future of clean energy, here today." "I can't believe it," Jason muttered, his voice full of awe. "It's everywhere." Sarah grinned. "I know. I just saw the article, and then I checked social media. It's trending worldwide. People are really getting behind this, Jason. We've made a real impact." Jason felt a wave of pride wash over him. This was more than just a product. It was a movement, a message that was resonating with people everywhere. It was what he had always dreamed of, but the reality of it was even more incredible than he had imagined. As the days passed, the team's workload increased, but so did their excitement. The momentum was undeniable, and they could see that they were on the verge of something much bigger than just the smart energy plug. This was just the beginning. The conversation about sustainability was spreading, and Jason felt the urge to push even harder, to do more, to innovate further, and to never lose sight of their mission. Carlos, who had been overseeing the production side of things, approached Jason with a look of determination on his face. "We've got another problem, but I think it's a good one," he said, a hint of excitement in his voice. Jason raised an eyebrow. "What's that?" "Demand is outpacing production," Carlos said. "We've sold out twice in the past month. I think we're going to need to expand manufacturing, go global with production. And not just for the plug. People are asking for more. They want more energy-saving products." Jason thought about it for a moment, the weight of Carlos's words sinking in. They had built something remarkable, but now the world was demanding more. The plug had only been the beginning, and he knew they couldn't stop now. "We'll make it happen," Jason said, his voice firm. "If we're going to change the world, we have to be ready to go global. We need to scale up production, fast. But we also need to keep innovating. Let's look into other products, energy-saving solutions. People want more, and we can give it to them." Sarah nodded. "I've already been thinking about that. We've got the infrastructure to support it, and the message is already clear. We don't just want to sell products. We want to offer solutions to help people reduce their carbon footprint, save money, and build a better world." Jason smiled at his team, feeling a sense of unity that made him believe they could truly achieve anything. They had come so far, and now they were ready to push further. Days turned into weeks, and soon the smart energy plug was available on an even larger scale. More and more customers were experiencing the benefits of the device, sharing their stories and photos online. The product was no longer just a trend, it was a part of daily life for people who were serious about reducing their environmental impact. From busy cities to remote communities, the plug was making a difference. And then, a phone call came in. Jason picked up, expecting it to be another update on sales or production. "Jason, we've got something big," Sarah's voice crackled through the line. "It's the United Nations. They want to talk about a global partnership. Jason's heart skipped a beat. The United Nations? A partnership? It was hard to even fathom. They want to explore ways we can work together to tackle the global energy crisis, Sarah continued. They're impressed with the smart energy plug and want to help amplify our message. They believe we could help change the future of energy usage on a global scale. Jason couldn't believe his ears. This was the kind of recognition they had only dreamed of. It was validation, not just for the product, but for the movement they had started. This is huge, Jason said, barely able to process it. Let's do it. We're ready. And so, they entered discussions with the United Nations, exploring how the smart energy plug could be part of larger international initiatives. The possibilities were endless, and Jason felt like the sky was the limit. They were no longer just a small startup with a single product. They were a global force for change, working with world leaders to solve one of the planet's most pressing issues. As the year came to a close, Jason stood once again at the window of his office, looking out over the city. It was late, and the lights of the skyscrapers blinked like stars in the distance. He had come a long way since those early days in his apartment, but the journey was far from over. They had built something real, something that mattered, and now they had the chance to change the world. Jason took a deep breath, filled with both gratitude and anticipation. The smart energy plug had been the beginning, but it was only the beginning. The world was listening, and it was time to take the next step. The future was bright, and the best was yet to come. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?